everybody. So, a little while ago I did touch on this subject, but I want to go into it a little bit more because I don't feel that people necessarily appreciate just how much less maintenance an electric motorcycle is going to require, or may require, or could even require. Um, I have this Zero SRF on loan from English Electric Motorcycle Company, thanks to them. I'm doing videos and a review on this at the moment, but I thought while I have it, I'll talk about this because it's a very good way of showing you exactly what is and isn't on an electric. Okay, before we go over the differences, let's look at the similarities, the things that you are going to have to do on petrol or electric. It makes no difference. Starting on the front, tyres. Now, there obviously is going to be different wear between different bikes, so we can't really say whether electric or petrol is going to be better in that respect. But tyres are something you're going to have to replace. Wheel bearings is also something you have to maintain on both bikes. I can't see any reason why one would go out quicker than the other. Suspension, again, nothing changes here. Bulbs and braking systems. All this, none of this changes. So basically, the entire front end of the bike is the same petrol or electric. And if we move to the rear, we've got tyres, pads, disc brakes, wheel bearings, all the same between the two. There is a difference on this bike, however, that it is belt driven and not chain driven. On a petrol motorcycle, obviously you are going to have chain and sprockets. On this you have a belt, but we'll get into that when we talk about the differences. So let's continue along on the similarities. Lights and frame and everything, this is all pretty much the same. Suspension, that's going to have the same sort of maintenance schedule. Swing arm bushes and all that sort of stuff is about the same. And of course the frame itself isn't going to be much different, apart from one thing actually that is very interesting about this Zero, which is the way the frame's been designed with this trellis piece here, which can be removed on the side of it. Should bigger batteries be invented in the future, or there be a different way of you wanting to put something in here, by removing that trellis frame, fitting in whatever you want, you can then build a frame that will fit, over and around using the same mounting points. It's only tube steel. That's not a particularly expensive job to get a shop welder to do. So if you were to, say, customise it or put bigger battery packs in it in the future, that's something that can easily accommodate it. Not many bikes are designed with the idea that you could change the engine in the future when a better one comes along. These two things here are the battery packs, and obviously that's where your engine would normally be. And then at the swing arm point, we have the big coppery looking thing, which is the motor. And then underneath the bike here, we have the control unit for the bike. So all these sort of electrics that control the power between the batteries and the motor. And then on this model, because this has got the charge tank on it, I believe it's called, basically this tank is different to a stock tank in that it has a quick charger in it, which allows you to charge this bike a lot faster using the 22 kilowatt chargers through the Type 2 connector, which can be found in here. So as you probably already know or have worked out by this point, the only differences between an electric and a petrol engined bike is this bit in here and the tank, and also what's connected to the front of the engine, as in the cooling system. Everything else of the bike is the same and comparable, so we now need to talk about the differences. What maintenance has to be done on an electric bike specifically? Well, you have the batteries. You don't really maintain those. They are what they are. They have warranties on them. They do last a lot longer than people think, but they are extremely expensive. Something to say about batteries that people may not realise is that they can be repaired. They are made of individual cells, and say you have one cell or a line of cells go bad, they can be fixed. Then you have the motor. Obviously that has one moving part, and motors tend to do alright. Again, these motors can be fixed, they can be rebuilt. They're not like, a consumable motor from, a radio control car that when it's broken, it's broken. These can be maintained, these can have work done on them, but they don't go wrong that often because they're one moving part. Batteries tend to be, if they're well made, they can make battery packs to survive plane crashes and car crashes and all of these sorts of things. It can be done, but the money has to be spent, and that's one of the reasons why the battery is expensive. People complain about the electric batteries being expensive. I wouldn't want a cheap battery in there. Have you seen the hoverboards? And the cheap electric bikes? Yeah, you don't need a campfire when one of those goes up. Obviously the control unit itself could go wrong. I mean, I don't know how regularly that sort of stuff happens. But again, it's computer based. It's not mechanical. It's something that can be built to a standard, potted electrics, vibration resistant. It can be built, but it costs money. Let's remember this bike is £20,000. I think that's extra for the charge tank. I can't remember. But there are equivalents of this which are 10 and soon hopefully less. But this is a bit of a special one, so it's quite expensive. Zero give good guarantees on the batteries. If you look into buying one of these bikes, you'll find out all about that. 100,000 miles out of a set of batteries is easy, from what I understand. Most bikes aren't going to see 100,000 miles if they're petrol. As I mentioned earlier on, this uses a belt and pulleys rather than chain and sprockets. The pulleys themselves don't need to replace that often compared to the belts, because the belts wear on rubberized and they wear more than the pulleys do, whereas in chains, both wears. Those belts, I had a quick look online, they seem to be about 50 quid at most. That's going to be quite a lot cheaper than just the chain, and you don't have to replace them as often, as long as everything's done right with them. They're a good quality belt, they last a very long time. They're also maintenance free because you don't really lube them or anything like that. But yeah, a good belt, it's like, from what I can see, is about 50 quid. A decent chain, sort of a good chain, what, 120 maybe? 180? Depends what you're looking at, DID normally. Let's get the petrol bike out and let's start pointing out all the things in petrol bikes that can go wrong. And also things that you must do because they will go wrong. For an example of a petrol machine, I will be using my 2010 Yamaha XJ6 Diversion, which I've done a full rebuild on recently. There is a series you can watch if you want to see that. Didn't go into the engine much, thankfully. Although actually I'm going to be, because I'm having the valves checked on this soon, which is something I'll get into. So as I was mentioning earlier, obviously front wheel brakes, suspension, front end, no different. Same with the back end, other than chain and sprockets. As you know, chain and sprockets need adjusting regularly, otherwise they will wear far too quickly. They need regular lubing of the right sort, depending on where you live and the conditions that you ride in, whether you go for dry lubes, wet lubes, etc. The quality of the chain that you use will make a difference. And even if you do all those things to the best that you can, you're looking at changing your chain and sprockets every, year or two? 2 years, should we say, roughly? Again, depends how you ride. You might say, well, I got 5 years out of mine. Great. I don't know what the average is, but I know that I don't get more than a couple of years out of a set of sprockets ever, and chain. But then I ride all year and I have a lot of sand in the area, which might not help, so who knows. Pretty expensive, and something you have to regularly do. And pulleys are quieter, so they kind of win in all directions. Cheaper, last longer, quieter, cleaner. Now, as I mentioned, everything else is the same, so let's talk about the unique things to a petrol. Well, obviously, you need to be putting petrol in it quite regularly if you're going anywhere. That gets very expensive. To fill this bike up is about £13-14, something like that. That will give me, I don't know the mileage on this one, but if I do it for my DR, which is a 10-litre tank, you can work out from that how much it's going to cost to fill it, depending on the prices near you. That will get me around 100 miles, 110 miles before I need to refill. And I think that's roughly about £10-11 to refill the DR. Something like that. Might be more now, depends on the petrol prices. I tend not to pay attention. I just fill it because you have to, because you have no fuel gauge. To fully charge the Zero on a quick charger, it's a £1 connection fee, and then it's going to be no more, and you're going to get again about 100 and something miles out of that. So petrol to electric cost is hugely cheaper. So you've already paid a lot for the fuel going in. Then there's a fuel filter which has to be changed periodically, but not that regularly, but it's a thing that has to be changed. Then moving down into the engine itself, one of the most obvious ones is oil changes. It costs about £30 in oil to fill this bike, and then you have an oil filter, sorry. So you're looking at, about £7? So you're probably looking at about £40 every 4,000 or 5,000 miles. 4,000 miles, 5, depends on the bike you ride. If it's a DRZ, every 1,000 miles really, you should be changing your oil, and that takes 2 litres, so it's £20 every 1,000 miles, if you do it to the proper way you're supposed to. But yeah, about 40 quid to change the oil, something like that. If you do it yourself, that is. If you can't do this, and this is why I'm a real proponent of trying to teach people to do maintenance themselves, if you go to a garage to have an oil change, they're going to probably charge you quite a bit more. And it's an easy job. Another thing that will definitely have to be done to a petrol bike at least once or twice in its lifetime is the valves will need adjusting. The height of the valves is very important for the engine to run properly, and they can go out of spec. So on some overhead cam engines, you have a screw you can adjust, so it's nice and easy. Other ones you'll actually have to take the head off, measure the gap between the cam and the valve, and then with feeler gauges, and then work out if you have to change the shims to get that gap correct. That job, depending, on a 125 that it's adjusted by doing 2 caps and 2 screws, you can do it yourself probably, and it's not going to charge you a lot of money if you go to a garage, hopefully. Something like this requires taking the tank off, taking all of the airbox out and everything out the top, and then you have to measure all 4, because it's an inline 4, sets of valves. Of course, there are more than 4 valves. There's 16 in this, I believe, because it's 4 per pot. But yeah, you have to measure the valves, get the shims, and change that, and that's something that will need to be done on a bike at some point in its life. Now, this bike has got 52,000 miles, and we're going to check the valves now. It should have been done before now, but it's been fine. So we'll find out how out of spec they are after that amount of time. I have heard some Yamahas just don't go out of spec for some reason, they're within the tolerance range still after a very long time. So continuing on, another one you have to change is the coolant. Obviously, electric motorcycles at this point in time, most of them do not have any coolant in them. They may very well have that in the future because it's a vast improvement for the motors and for the control units and the batteries to keep them cool for charging and running and everything. So it may be something that we see in the future, but for now, no coolant to be changed every, couple of years? Give it a bit of a flush every couple of years. Put some new coolant in there, not massively expensive, but again, it's time, and if it's something that you won't do yourself, it's cost. I mean, on this bike, you do have to take this panel off, for instance, to get to that cap. So it's not a 10-minute job. It's it's an hour or so. Easy job. I love doing, and if anyone's watching this going, well, that's fine. You'll just do that. It's easy. It doesn't cost that much. Yeah, I know, but not everyone can do it, and these things are adding up. So continuing on to things that aren't regular maintenance, but do tend to have to get done at some point in a bike's life. Piston rings, the rings which help seal the pistons into the bores and also keep the oil out of your exhaust system, keep lubricating the system. That is something that does have to get done on bikes every now and then, and often if they go and it's not noticed, you then have to replace the bore liners or the bores, if it's an extreme example. 125s that don't get oil changes and have the living hell ridden out of them very often get leaky rings and then start burning quite a bit of oil because of that reason. Not necessarily an expensive job if you can buy the parts yourself and do it, but it is if you take it to a garage and they have to take the engine out or at least take the head off to replace your rings and hopefully not the bore and everything like that. I know all about that because I own a DRZ 440 now. Also, you obviously have the cam, you have the gearbox shafts, you have lots and lots of shafts in an engine, a petrol engine for a bike, going side to side, which both have a bearing on each end. Those bearings do and can go wrong. It's not such a regular thing to have them go wrong unless you do weird things to a bike, like put massively bigger power into it than they were expecting to receive, and that could damage a bearing over time. You can get a faulty bearing. They can just wear out, not having the right oil in it for a long time and having an oil-starved bearing that then spins. There is lots of ways that you might require a bearing to be changed. If that happens, it gets real expensive because some of those bearings can only be got to by taking the entire engine out, taking the head off, splitting it and getting into it that way. You also have spark plugs in a petrol engine which have to be replaced every, 15,000 miles, something like that, maybe 10, 15, 20, something around there. Not hugely expensive, not particularly difficult to do, but again, it is something that needs to be done. And you may notice that all of this talking I've been doing, none of this stuff exists on an electric bike. Obviously, this has a gearbox, and gearboxes can have issues. You can have bent selector forks, you can have wear and tear on gears, you can have someone not riding it properly and grinding a couple of gears and losing second. There is all sorts of problems that can occur with gearboxes as well. So, as you can see, my point is, a petrol engine is full of a lot of stuff that needs to be maintained and will likely need to be maintained at some point in the life of the bike. If, as I say, you consider that most petrol bikes don't get to 100,000 miles, versus I think they do guarantee getting 100,000 miles out of one of those battery packs. Not that exact wording, but it's so much percentage charged by such a point in miles. So look into it. Now, as I say, I know the Zero is £20,000 and it's a lot to buy to start with, but if you actually kept it for the lifetime of bike, say for one owner, say 10 years, I know it's probably longer than that, but say 10 years, in 10 years of running that bike, I'm pretty sure that the lack of paying for oil changes, paying 5 times less for fuel, something like that, it may be even less than that when you charge at home, all the maintenance, the chain, the sprockets, and all the sort of things that come with a petrol engine, I think you'd see that money back and maybe a bit more. I think it would actually work out cheaper in the long run. I'm not saying electric is necessarily the future. I am not saying that electric is more environmentally friendly. I'm not saying any of these things. I'm just saying that if you are actually looking to buy an electric bike and you're trying to do the costing differences and you don't know what goes into running a petrol bike, there's an example of the maintenance that does need to be done to a bike. This is why I push people to learn maintenance, because when you have a petrol bike, you kind of need to be a bit of a mechanic as well. You know, able to get the spanners out and do a few simple jobs, because it will save you a lot of money that you then can spend a professional to do the job if you don't feel like doing it. I could do my valve timing on this, but I'm actually going to get Hazelman Motorcycles to do it because they are experts and they will not mess it up. And the thing is, if you get that wrong, it can be costly. And the cost of getting them to do it is worth it for me. But normally, everything else I do myself. I think I've pretty much covered everything, but there may be some obvious ones I've forgotten. Please do add to the comments anything that, you know, difference between electrics and petrols that makes maintenance better or worse, for vice or versa. Let's not get into an argument of, like, you know, the sustainability and all of that of them. I'd love to have a conversation on the mechanics of them. Look at them as a thing rather than everything that goes along with it. So yes, comments below. If you've enjoyed this video, please just take a moment to hit the like button. I would really appreciate it. Subscribe if you're new here, because I'm on my way to 100k. I'm very close. And if you want to help support this channel, please consider supporting it through Patreon. Links in the description. So thanks to English Electric Motorcycle Company for lending me the Zero. I've already got a few videos filmed on that. I've got more to do. I'm going to be covering some more subjects to do with electrics, particularly to do with silence. So yes, thank you for joining me. I'll catch you in the next one. Bye bye.